Okay, does she know where she's sitting? Okay. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to welcome you to this panel on the first anniversary of the Paris Call for Trust and Security in Cyberspace, building a multi-stakeholder approach to cyber security. Okay. So we have with us distinguished speakers to talk about the first anniversary of the Paris Call. Today, Jean-Baptiste Lemoyne, who is the French Minister of State attached to the Minister for Europe and Foreign Affairs. Gabriela Ramos, who is the Chief of Staff of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD. She's also the Sherpa of the G20. John Frank, who is Vice President in charge of European Union Government Affairs at Microsoft, and Eugene Kaspersky, who is the co-founder and CEO of Kaspersky Lab. Before I introduce the subject, I think that Minister Lemoyne wants to say a few words.
Merci beaucoup, Frédéric. Merci à chacune et à chacun de vous être rendu disponible pour qu'aujourd'hui nous puissions débattre de ce sujet majeur. C'est vrai qu'on commémore un an d'appel de Paris. C'est ici même, le 12 novembre 2018, que l'initiative a été lancée par le président de la République. Et un an plus tard, c'est l'occasion d'un bilan. Et ce bilan, eh bien, je dois dire qu'il est plutôt flatteur. Et je veux remercier tous les soutiens de cet appel. Parce que cette initiative a été un peu inédite. Je crois que c'était la première fois qu'on rentrait dans cette logique multi-acteurs, un peu de régulation de ce cyberespace. Parce que la seule action des États ne peut pas suffire. Et donc il y avait cette conviction profonde, eh bien, d'embarquer à la fois les entreprises, qu'elles soient multinationales comme la vôtre, ou bien des PME très spécialisées, d'embarquer également naturellement les ONG, là aussi, qu'elles soient globales ou qu'elles soient à l'initiative d'actions concrètes locales, pour défendre des principes communs exigeants, pour défendre des comportements responsables. Et un an plus tard, où en est-on ? Eh bien, écoutez, on a plus que doublé le nombre de soutiens parce que, souvenez-vous, il y a un an, ce sont 450 entités, États, entreprises, ONG qui avaient appuyé l'appel. Et aujourd'hui, nous sommes à un peu plus de 1038 pour être précis, très précis. Et nous allons continuer à faire vivre cette communauté. Henri Verdier, notre ambassadeur au numérique, va vous présenter tout à l'heure cette plateforme Internet également qui est l'occasion de mieux faire connaître l'appel. Et puis, il y a un certain nombre, je crois, d'instances internationales. Je vois Gabriela, donc l'OCDE, naturellement, G7, G20, ONU, dans lequel on discute de ces enjeux de cybersécurité. Et naturellement, on souhaite au maximum partager au sein de ces instances, de ces enceintes, les principes de l'appel de Paris. Donc, merci pour tout ce qui a été fait depuis un an. Et puis, on continue le combat ensemble.
Thank you very much. So, a year ago, when President Macron launched the Paris Call, in his speech at the UNESCO, the Internet Governance Forum, he insisted that the Internet we take for granted is under threat. And unfortunately, the least we can say is that the threat is not going away. This morning, we talked about the geopolitical Europe. And in 1976, the geographer Yves Lacoste, who founded geopolitical studies in France, wrote a foundational and very provocative book stating that geography was primarily used to make war. And this seems increasingly true of cyberspace as well today. So, of course, the internet was not invented to wage war, and the global interconnection of digital network has profoundly changed our lives and our economies. It has transformed the way we work, the way we communicate, the way we interact as human beings. It has allowed tremendous progress for our societies. But it is also true that the great benefits that were brought by the digital revolution are under threat. And they're under threat because cyberspace has become a space of conflict, a space of confrontation, and a space of fierce strategic competition. The first threat is to peace and international security, because cyber attacks against critical infrastructures, against private companies, and even electoral processes have increased, and they've become more sophisticated and more targeted. I think Eugene would agree. Meanwhile, what we notice is the attack surface keeps expanding because our societies are increasingly dependent on leaked escalation. The second threat is to the stability of cyberspace itself, because the infrastructures that support cyberspace are under constant attack, whether it is cables, satellites, routing systems, or else. So there is a risk to cyber stability itself. In other words, it questions whether we can trust our ability to use cyberspace safely and securely. And this is the reason why the Global Commission on the Stability of Cyberspace was established in 2017, and we will actually present our final report with a set of norms, recommendations to guide responsible state and non-state behavior in cyberspace in the following panel, and some of the recommendations we propose are already included in the Paris Call. The third threat is systemic. We're clearly in a cyber arms race to the bottom. Proliferation is particularly hazardous in cyberspace because offensive tools can be copied, they can be stolen, they can be re-engineered, they can be used. The new concepts of attack can be copied as well, and they can backfire. And they have backfired. If you see WannaCry or NotPetya, they were teachable moments with the rapid and massive propagation and global propagation of malware that led to the most destructive attack to this day. So there's a lot we don't know about the vulnerabilities of our system, and we're now talking about using artificial intelligence in defense, but potentially also in offensive actions, which raises more challenge. The nation states, they're caught between their need to address these systemic risks, but also their legitimate interest in a heightened strategic competition that undermines international cooperation and the ability to find consensus over the regulation of cyberspace. And yet this consensus is indispensable to promote peace, security, and the stability of cyberspace. And because cyberspace is by essence a multi-actor domain, this can only be achieved through the cooperation of all stakeholders. So this is the goal of the Paris Call for Trust and Security in Cyberspace. And for the first time, this initiative has gathered actors of different sectors who have agreed to share commitments to strengthen cybersecurity for all. And it is now supported by over 1,000 signatories, so congratulations. Signatories worldwide, including 73 states, but also companies and civil society organizations. And in addition, there are 2 multilateral dialogues that have started and that Jean-Baptiste Lemoyne mentioned. This year at the United Nations, the Open-Ended Working Group and the Group of Governmental Experts. And this group will discuss norms of responsible behavior for states and confidence building measures. So I guess the main questions of this panel is how to best continue the Paris Call efforts and how to combine them with these two tracks at the United Nations. And to address these questions, I might turn first to Jean-Frank. Could you talk a little bit about what the achievements have been so far of the Paris Call?
When we first began contemplating the Paris Call a year and a half ago, the discussion was, could this be multi-stakeholder, but not necessarily break new ground on new norms? And so a drafting principle or a conceptual principle was to stay with previously agreed language so that we weren't trying to negotiate new norms, but we were trying to do something different, which was expand the dialogue on cybersecurity. And so cybersecurity policy has often been the domain of nation states, and it's important, of course, that it be so, but the internet is largely owned and operated by the private sector. And the same information technology that powers governments also powers the private sector and our personal lives. And so we're all vulnerable together. So what I think is especially unique about the Paris Call, two things at this point. One, it's a commitment to work together. We say that we're going to work on the 9 principles or the 9 challenges because we need to go beyond the one-sentence descriptions so they can be elaborated and we can understand what norms could be. And we need to have more detailed discussions, and that's what's, I think, happening this year. The second thing that I think is incredibly important about it is broadening out the number of countries where this dialogue is taking place. With 73 signatories, but the discussion's taking place in many more. And so, we have more than, I think there's now 12 Latin American countries. I think there's 10 African countries, several Middle Eastern countries. So the place where these discussions are taking place isn't just the developed world like-minded groups, but it's being distributed. And it's not just the governments there, but it's also civil society and businesses in those countries that are engaging and bringing energy to this discussion. So we hope to see it continue to expand, but I do think the question now is, where do we go? We've had a great first year. The challenge is going to be, how do we make the multi-stakeholder model that President Macron made the sort of centerpiece for this peace forum, and how do we bring that community to making real progress across a range of issues?
Thank you. Gabriela?
Well, I have to say that one of the main contributions that this call has made is exactly what you mentioned, to bring everybody together, not only countries, but also companies. The infrastructure that is being developed is by the private sector, and also international organizations. I have to say that when you think about this, because at the OECD we have a Going Digital project that is broader than only cybersecurity. It's about the digital technologies and how much they are permeating every single aspect of our lives. And the fact that we have this massive flow and exchange of data that is at the core of developing new products, new services, and of course of developing new risks in the cyberspace. Just to get a good understanding of what we're talking about is massive. I think that we are, of course, here dealing with one of the most difficult aspects, because it has to do with crime. It has to do with the use of the technologies and of the platforms to advance criminal activities. But at the OECD, we're also looking at the impact of the technologies on our children when they spend 6 hours a day in front of the screen. Or we talk about what it happens when you have these breaches of data flows, the social security services. We know that almost half of our populations in the OECD have used the digital services to do transactions related to their health, to their education, to their commercial activities. So the sense of vulnerability, I think, is real. And to get a clear definition of what do we mean by cybersecurity and how we are going to address it is massively difficult. And just think about also to get a little bit sense of reality. When you are dealing with international crime, and you are the expert, you need common definitions. You cannot persecute a person if countries don't have common definitions and the same typology of the criminal act. You need to have common legal infrastructure to exchange information and to allow you to protect, of course, the security or the integrity of your citizens, while at the same time advancing the fight against these crimes. How difficult it becomes when it is in the outer space. I think this is something that we have to consider. The threat of misuse of information. We have also seen it in the interventions in democratic processes. I mean, there's so many expressions of this very great vulnerability that we have. And then, of course, when you think what will happen when you have an attack on systems that are controlling airspace or transactions, or we know that is happening. So, and I have to say that at the OECD, we have been trying to deal with these issues also, because at the OECD, we don't deal with geopolitics, thanks God. That's an area that we don't deal with, but we deal with the economics. And we know that the cost that can have these kind of disruptions that are created to the good working of the cyberspace can be very costly economically. Let me tell you that in 1980, the OECD set the first international standard for personal data protection, which is at the core of what we're talking about. And in 2015, we developed the recommendation on digital security risk management for economic and social prosperity. Just risk management, defining the risk, thinking about the risk, developing the tools for companies, for governments to understand what is a risk, how do we typify it, and how do we address it. And then also, what is the shared responsibility, what is the risk assessment, what is security, transparency, cooperation across borders, as I said, and what kind of guidance we have for effective national strategies that build up for the international cooperation. And then on the days after of the Paris Call launch, and this is something that it inspires. I think that the Paris Peace Forum is good of that, because it brings a lot of this energy to address the issues. We launched the OECD Global Forum on Digital Security for Prosperity, and we're working in partnership with France, and we're discussing with the private sector. So the whole call is, how do we define the risks? How do we define the responsibilities? How do we define who is to do what? And then, of course, clarifying the limits of what business can do, what governments can do, and how do we bring together a space that is safer? Because as we say at the OECD, of course, it's amazing what you can do with the internet. Amazing when it's used for good. But then it's also very worrisome when it falls in the hands of the criminals.
Yeah, and we can add maybe that the attack of NotPetya alone cost, according to the White House of the United States, $10 billion. So the economic sector is definitely harshly impacted. And thanks for broadening a little bit the definition of cybersecurity and vulnerabilities that are not just about information systems and data, but also about societies facing new technologies. So Eugene, if you'd like to follow up on this.
Thank you so much. Bonjour, Madame, Monsieur. So I'm as a person working in cybersecurity for 30 years. To me, it's quite a clear logic what we need to do. Well, actually, we're living in a cyber world, and it's everything cyber around us. And unfortunately, it's vulnerable. It's like a crystal world, which can be easily damaged. And actually, the damage on the national economies and global economies from the cybercrimes or the cyber threats, it's rising year by year. So how to handle that issue? How to fix the problem? There are just three things. First of all, technologies. Second, education in wide terms. And third, the law enforcement and international cooperation. It's very necessary because the first things, the technologies, the products, the cybersecurity or cyber immunity, we can handle that. We can do it. As Microsoft, we are cybersecurity industry, we can protect you. You can make you even immune from cyber threats. Education also, we can do it. So we are doing that. But third thing, when it comes to the government level, the thing is that in a cyberspace, the bad guys, they don't have borders. You understand it. It's reality. But the nations, they still are behaving within their national interests. They're staying in the borders. Well, regions, cooperations, but still they're different regions or different countries. And to fight with the bad guys in the cyberspace, there has to be very strict cooperation between nations and not depending on their geopolitical issues. So that's why when we support, as me personally and our company supports all the kind of initiatives, is it private, public, governments, international organizations like Interpol. So we are the first to support that. So I hope that the Paris Peace Forum is one of the right place to explain, to talk about these issues and to find the right ways how to make this world safer.
Thank you.
I like cyber world. Do you? We're a very lucky generation because we still remember. I see the faces that I'm sure we still remember the world before cyber.
Yes.
Correct?
Absolutely.
Do you remember the old style telephones like a?
We had them.
Do you like it? No.
Thank you very much. So, Minister, how do we overcome the geopolitical tensions to achieve security and stability in cyberspace?
Alors, il est certain que dans le cadre des négociations qui ont lieu, qui ont cours, y compris au sein du système onusien, on voit bien qu'il peut y avoir différentes approches de ce sujet de cybersécurité. Et c'est pour ça qu'on a tenu pour notre part avec l'appel de Paris et toutes celles et ceux qui sont ici présents, on a été les fervents promoteurs depuis le début, c'est pouvoir sortir de visions parfois peut-être un peu idéologiques qui veulent orienter le débat pour être avec tout le monde, les utilisateurs, monsieur et même tout le monde, comme les entreprises, les associations, etc. Et donc nous, on attend beaucoup de ce processus grâce à l'input qui va être donné par tous les partenaires de l'appel de Paris. Et on l'espère dépassionner un peu le débat en étant très pragmatique, très concret. Il y a un droit international qui existe, qui se met en place dans les trois dimensions terre, air, mer. Et bien désormais, ce droit international doit également trouver à s'appliquer sur cette quatrième dimension qu'est l'espace cyber, et c'est la façon dont on voit les choses. Je crois que au-delà de cet aspect institutionnel et géopolitique, comme ça a été dit parfaitement par M. Kaspersky, il faut quelque part aussi s'occuper de la montée en capacité de chacun et faire en sorte que ce soit aussi un sujet qui, dès l'éducation, soit partagé parce que la première sécurité, elle commence par la sécurité active faite par un individu, une personne, dans toutes ses activités pour elle-même, de façon responsable, se protéger, etc. Et naturellement, les États ont la responsabilité, dans le cadre international, avec les parties prenantes, d'élaborer un cadre juridique, d'étendre le cadre juridique existant, mais ça commence à la base par chacune et chacun. Et c'est ce que je voulais dire, parce qu'il y a certes ce travail pour apaiser les tensions géopolitiques, mais que par ailleurs, chacun d'entre nous doit se sentir intéressé à l'affaire et partie prenante.
So you mentioned international right, but we all know that the devil is in the details about, I think there is a consensus now that international law applies to cyberspace, but the question is the modalities and the details of how it applies. And we have these two processes at the United Nations, but we ended up with two resolutions voted the same day, one sponsored by the United States, the other by Russia, and recently we had another two resolutions that were proposed proposed at the United Nations. So the question is, what role can the Paris Call play in the midst of this? I mean, could the Paris Call bring together countries to propose a resolution at the United Nations? Could it be a force in the middle of power rivalries between great powers?
I think the Paris Call can play an important role in enlarging the audience that's participating in the discussions. And many of the countries in the General Assembly and on the Open-Ended Working Group don't necessarily have a great deal of expertise on these topics. But the Paris Call is an opportunity for them to engage with their local industry and trade associations and civil society to have discussions about these points. So, I think 14 of the 25 members of the group of governmental experts have signed the Paris Call. So that's a pretty good start to at least some consensus around basic principles. And other people may not have signed because they disagree with one principle or concerned about it. But I do think that we're going to move towards having the discussion with more consensus. But there's an aspect of this where we also, it may be easier if we kind of work on at a technical level. This is where industry does play a crucial role. Principle 8 of the Paris Call is essentially that private sector companies shouldn't be hacking back. Now, that's a fine principle to articulate, but to engineers, that needs a lot more elaboration. I think one of the opportunities now this next year is to engage with engineers and policymakers to actually talk through, like, okay, what are particular steps that people are concerned about so that at an operational level, you can build more consensus about what that is. And when you have that consensus, then you've got the basis for a norm of behavior. So we have to work our way up. And I think that will be perhaps the most important contribution of this broad multi-stakeholder community.
So talking about the non-hacking back, meaning that you don't let private actors or companies retaliate in cyberspace. It has a technical dimension. It also has a dimension regarding international law. Who is responsible if they do? What happens if a state lets a private actor use offensive tools to conduct operations? That leads me to another question, since you mentioned some points of the Paris Call. Do you believe that some of the commitments of the Paris Call could or should be turned into international obligations? And I will mention one regarding the fact that the private sector should release safe products. We know that there are a lot of connected devices that are released to the market that are not safe right now. So do you think maybe, Eugene, that the private sector has a responsibility? You were mentioning that you could deliver products that were completely immune.
Yeah, well, actually, you touched a very interesting issue. First of all, why software products they have so many mistakes, vulnerabilities, etc., etc. It's very simple, because the software engineering, it's a very, very young thing. For example, when we build some constructions, there are engineers which had the trainings, there are standards, there are regulation, and there are penalties if engineers or workers don't follow these regulations, so standards, industrial standards. In software engineering, but we build the humans, Homo sapiens, they build the buildings for thousands of years. So we learned all that by mistakes. Software engineering is very young. So its technology is less than 100 years old. So in some 100 years from now, I'm sure there will be standards and trainings and regulation and many, many, many other things to guarantee that when the software is done, is made, it's safe, secure, zero mistakes, zero vulnerabilities. It's a good piece of code. Not at the moment. But at the same time, so my answer is no and yes. But at the same time, I think that now it's a very right time to introduce regulation, for example, for Internet of Things. This simple kind of regulation, for example, when you have connected devices, they must have different passwords by default, like this. So the most critical things, they have to be regulated. Then I'm sure that now it's a very right time to introduce regulation to the critical infrastructure, which is going on. So there are many nations already that have some regulation about critical infrastructure. So the software, hardware made for critical infrastructure must be under very strict control. I'm not going to get deeper in the details, but well, we as a cybersecurity company, we're a technology company, we can advise. We can advise what we need to do to make this world immune. So there's a space for regulation, and I think that the Paris Call could be there. I'm not sure this can regulate the rest of the world, but as a good advisor to the rest of the world, to let the rest of the world to follow these ideas, I think, well, it's possible. We can work on that.
So it's a young field, but isn't it also an economic problem, maybe, Gabriela? Because we see that companies are racing to the market to release products first, and sometimes they're not completely finished. Or...
Well, I think that's exactly the point. I think that we are used to the fact that regulators always follow the markets. The markets are always ahead of regulators, and that's real in the world offline, and it's more in the world online, because the technologies are such a level of complexity and level of understanding that is not an easy. Even governments need to be build their own capacity building to trace and to understand what do you mean to put in the market a safe product. I think that we have good experiences in terms of this kind of framework, but the whole point here is not about if governments or individual governments are capable or defining their own rules regarding these markets and the products that are put in the markets. The question is, how much do we have common definitions? Because this is international. There's nothing more international than the internet. There's nothing more international that the platforms that are providing the services in so many fields and the technology that is being developed. And therefore, what I feel it's really the space we need to feel is to bring very different approaches together. Mm-hmm. You have countries like France that is more prone to develop very strong regulations, regulatory frameworks. The government is very clear that they have to do this. I have to say that the European Commission, when they put together their regulations regarding the protection of data, personal data, and all the question of the individual data, everybody said that it was too rigorous. This is really, it's going to kill well, no. We now know that it was not. I mean, it was, of course, probably some thought that it was very stringent. The fact is that it now is proven because of what we have been living in the last years, something that was necessary. But we still have very different approaches that call for the platforms to go for voluntary kind of measures, which are fine, because, of course, these at least help us to get them to be accountable and responsible for some of the products they developed. But then there are some others that cannot avoid the duty of care by the governments in terms of providing with the rule of law online. And to build the rule of law online while the online is being built is very complicated. And then you have a lot of notions that interject themselves. Let me tell you one very specific example that, of course, as I said, is not geopolitics, but when you had the Christchurch attack, and you know the mainstreaming of this attack and putting the content online, I mean, for everybody, it's very straightforward to say, let's take it out. It's wrong. So let's just have the rules to take out that content. I mean, you couldn't put countries to agree if this was the way to go. And you still have countries saying this needs to be voluntary. And of course, you have other countries that are raising concerns that once you start to put off content online, then you will be probably give room to some authoritarian regimes to block certain good uses of sharing information. So there are lots of elements that pull the issues from different perspectives. And the whole point is how do we bring the countries together? And that's why I think the Paris Call was important in the sense that at least we should be clear on what we are talking about. By the way, in Biarritz, in the G7, the OECD was called to do something that is interesting because we were called to work with the companies to see, to map out what kind of measures they have to detect, eliminate, and take out malicious content online. Mm-hmm. At least to know. What do they have? Do they have the regulatory inside their compliance or not? And we will be looking into that to see if we can map out good practices to at least advance on one very specific field, which is to protect the internet from this very malicious and violent and terrorist use.
Thank you. So regarding the regulation of private sector, there was an initiative by Jean-Yves Le Drian to try to bring industrials to the table to try to see how we could find regulations to for connected objects or for that purpose. Do you think the Paris Code could help achieve that? That was for you, Jean-Baptiste.
Indéniablement, cet appel de Paris, je crois qu'il a une force, c'est de s'appuyer sur le pragmatisme de la connaissance des différents acteurs, ce côté multi-acteurs, la connaissance des entreprises, Microsoft est là comme Kaspersky, la connaissance naturellement que les États ont à travers ce qu'ils ont parfois à subir. Et finalement, le rôle de cet appel de Paris, je crois, c'est d'être cette communauté vivante où eh bien, les bonnes pratiques vont être discutées, détectées et après vont pouvoir être peut-être généralisées. Et je crois que c'est la force de ce forum, de cette communauté qui demande de pouvoir s'appliquer dans cette quatrième dimension. Et donc un dernier point annexe mais important, c'est comment faire en sorte, parce qu'on voit bien que là, à travers l'appel de Paris, d'ailleurs, il y a une sorte de prise de conscience, je pense, qui va au-delà du secteur des connaisseurs, qu'ils soient experts, qu'ils soient dans le monde étatique ou multinational, mais comment faire en sorte qu'il y ait cette prise de conscience croissante, je parlais d'éducation tout à l'heure, mais prise de conscience pour tous les États. Parce qu'on voit qu'il y a un des fils du G7 à Biarritz, c'était la lutte contre les inégalités. Et quelque part, il peut y avoir aujourd'hui ou demain une inégalité devant la cybersécurité et devant la capacité à pouvoir se défendre ou à s'assurer en tous les cas que son cas de cyber est safe. Donc je crois que c'est là où nous on est en train de, en tant que France, préparer une stratégie pour le capacity building en matière de cybersécurité et qu'on appuiera toutes les initiatives qui vont dans ce sens parce qu'on ne peut pas considérer qu'au XXIe siècle, il y ait des États, des territoires qui restent en dehors de ce mouvement eh bien de sécurisation de cet espace. Et je crois que c'est un élément essentiel lié, encore une fois, à l'égalité qui doit prévaloir dans les relations internationales et tout court.
So thank you. So clearly we have an issue of definitions, but that's been around for quite a while, and we've been making progress at trying to understand what we're talking about and agree on what we're talking about, even though there is still work. But there is this huge issue of world imbalances in capabilities, in data flows, in cyber expertise. And at the same time, we have these huge imbalances. We're trying to make an effort to be a lot more inclusive in discussing these issues, meaning reaching out to countries that have not been part of the discussion so far, getting them involved in this multi-stakeholder approach, but also in the open-ended working group, although they might not have all the expertise they need. So is it a priority for the Paris Call to do capacity building in this? What concrete steps now are we going to take now that we've created the momentum? We have 1,000 signatories. What's your priorities?
One of the really interesting aspects of the moment is that you didn't mention is the fact that we do have geopolitical turbulence. government-to-government actions are not working as well as everyone would like. And before we had the session on multilateralism, and I think one aspect I just want to emphasize is that part of the Paris call is that businesses around the world want to cooperate across borders. Even when governments may have difficulties, businesses and civil society are an important bridge that will continue. In fact, we have a greater stake in making progress because of the geopolitical difficulties. And so when we think about next steps, I think in the preparations for this forum today, with other companies, we've held cybersecurity discussion groups in many national capitals, north and south, around the world. And what's exciting about it is the energy that cybersecurity professionals bring to the idea of getting to work across their silos. And so, the banking people, the idea that they can work on making the whole system more secure by talking with the telco people, that's a really exciting opportunity. And we each tend to think about our own products, but the multi-stakeholder model says, let's go above that and let's talk about how do we think about the whole system. And so, but it's going to be those bottom-up discussions taking place country by country, where we've got bringing people together and encouraging and asking them to take up this challenge. And, my experience this fall has been people are ready and they want to help. So I think we've got this broad sense of engagement, and we need to find projects that people can work on, or they need to find projects where they think they can make progress on an important issue to them. And it is important to think about, emerging economies have different needs than Western Europe. And trying to understand and learn, and the discussion about what kind of capacity building is most helpful. I think we understand capacity building is a priority. We need to have a dialogue. It's going to be different things to different countries, but I think that's the engagement, and that's the opportunity to learn more, and that will help us move forward.
Yeah, and also understand what really matters for the countries that have not been part of the conversation yet. So is the multi-stakeholder model a way to kind of put pressure on states to achieve something in terms of regulation as well, or could they just create something else?
Regulation and legislating can't answer all our problems. Sometimes we just need to do things. Right? And we can't wait for regulation and legislatures. They're important, but some of the stuff is industry to industry. We need to take action. We need to look at how do we make the internet a more secure, infrastructure, so that your work on the Global Commission, very focused on the core infrastructure of the internet, protecting it. Well, there's technological solutions that can help make it more secure as well. And those are the kind of things we get people together to talk about and work on and actually implement before a legislature would know what to do.
Yeah, I was talking about the 2 UN processes that, in order to play a role helping them out. But what exactly could civil society organizations or the private sector achieve by themselves, even if the geopolitical situation is a bit tense?
Maybe just to... I'm in an international organization, so I'm not going to answer what the private sector should do. We have, of course, ideas, but coming back to the multi-stakeholder, I think that the fact is that everybody has a part of knowledge, and I think that bringing the forces together helps to get something that is much more effective. Because what we're looking at is at effectiveness of the measures that we take, not to overdo it, to go only for risk protection instead of allowing for innovation, and on the other hand, not to leave everything to the markets and then come to realize that then there are these downsides of the technology. At the OECD, it was we had a multi-stakeholder process to develop principles for artificial intelligence, and we delivered last year in the ministerial meeting, and then we delivered them in the G20. The Osaka summit adopted, the G20 adopted these principles also. And it was a very interesting exercise because everybody came with their own perspective, but there was a common definition that was shared and that helped organize the whole debate, which has that artificial intelligence had to contribute to human values. As large as that is, but it's important. It has to contribute to democratic values. It has to contribute to protect the dignity of person. It has to, all the legal infrastructure, all the human infrastructure that we have developed for organizing ourselves as societies need to be embedded in all this development of technology. So that was the first recognition. But we didn't stop there because it would have been a very good statement, political statement. But what we did was then to hold accountable those that are going to be developing the technologies. And I think that's very important because then you need transparency, you need responsibility, who is responsible of what, and then you need transparency because you know how much do we know how you frame the algorithms, what kind of biases you're introducing, how are you going to use them? Do you have all these checkpoints when you get into the technological developments? And then when you put the product in the market, how are we going to be protecting those that are going to be at the receiving end? So we were proud to have those principles, and we were also proud to have the G20 adopting them. Of course, then you need to implement. And as you know, getting agreements is great, and getting a good understanding is great, but we need to implement them. On the question of the technological development, it's true that it's highly, highly concentrated. And you know it. 15 big platforms in the world, 11 are US nationals, and 3 are Chinese. So it's a real question here. We're not touching upon the fact of who owns the technology, who owns the data, how do we govern it. I think it's a very important element to bring to the discussions.
Thank you. So very quickly, if you want to add a comment, because we need to take questions from the audience. Yeah.
So actually, there's the question what the private sector have to do in times of the geopolitical storm. It's the same what a ship should do in time of storm. Keep going. It's hard to move. It's less comfortable, but there is no option. We have to move. With technologies, with education, with assisting the public sector, with cooperation with public sector. And my advice is that we are living in very, very fastly moving times. So the time is counting faster and faster and faster. We're like a generation. For example, what comes to my mind is that there were financial revolutions. Like we came from the seashells in the Cro-Magnon time, then it was golden coins, then banknotes. It was generations between. Then there were plastic. Now we have mobile within one generation. Same with cybercrime. It's going on. So while we're speaking, they are hacking. So we have to move forward.
Okay. We're going to take questions for the audience. Do we have any questions? So while people are thinking about questions, I might ask another question. We've seen that with the work you're doing in security intelligence. Oh, we have a question here. Could we get a microphone? Here.
Thank you. My name is Svetluša Surovat. Thank you very much for a very inspirational discussion and a very important one. So I would just like to follow up on something that was said, that those who build technology has to be held accountable. So I was thinking that also those who will set up the norms to control the rules in cyberspace, they also have to be accountable. So how you want to reach that, and how you want to bring all these discussions closer to the people that will be impacted by all this, to the citizens, because you talk about private sector, you talk about civil sector governments, but who talks about us, normal citizens? So that was one question, and only a second one, if I can very briefly. So you also were mentioning transparency, openness, and effectiveness, but also you haven't spoke about legitimacy. So I was wondering, how you want to make this initiative more legitimate from the perspective of citizens.
Thank you. So accountability, legitimacy, transparency. Who would like to answer?
Peut-être un mot sur comment arriver à sensibiliser les citoyens, parce que c'était la première question. Je crois qu'une des premières réponses, c'est la mise en ligne, ça y est, du site Paris Call date internationale, et c'est une plateforme à laquelle également les citoyens pourront contribuer. Donc je veux tout de suite en donner l'adresse du site web, et à travers le web, on le sait, on peut donc toucher des millions de personnes. Donc c'est une première réponse, mais naturellement il faut que nous continuions à faire cette pédagogie dans toutes les enceintes, dans tous les forums. C'est ce qu'on fera d'ailleurs en janvier à Lille.
John?
Well, just a comment. Governments call people citizens, we call them customers. And we have a huge commitment to keeping our customers secure and providing them with reliable, trusted technology. And so I think but we have this common interest with government that we want citizens, customers, to be protected from nation-state cyber attacks as well as cyber crime. And so those issues are challenging, but I think that the discussions and the Paris Call, the fact that we now have 1,000 organizations in the world that often represent many other organizations is a very positive step towards democratizing the discussion.
And I guess that from the OECD perspective, we actually are looking at all of these issues, but we are thinking about people. At the end, is the impact on people. When we look at all this infrastructure, when we think about the regulations, when we think about the international discussions, is about how to maximize the benefit that people can get from the digital technologies to improve their standard of living or their well-being, and how to protect people. And in the protecting people, I think that, of course, there is a very clear responsibility of the states, and there's no escape about that. The duty of care, as I said, is about the governments. But we also at the OECD, for example, we have developed the recommendation on child protection online. So that's one part. But then you also have to educate, as you mentioned, people on how to protect themselves, because they need to recognize the risks. It's a common endeavor. It really needs to be a common endeavor. It's not going to be just being one source that will be providing all the solutions.
Thank you. Is there any other question from the audience? Yes, we have two questions here. So we're going to take the two questions. Please make your questions brief, because we only have a couple of minutes.
Yes. Hello, so thank you very much. My question would be concerning the organization of the Paris core community. So will there be some kind of secretariat or something? How inclusive will it be, and will there be inclusion of non-governmental actors?
Thank you. And the second question, very quickly, please.
Thank you very much for a very inspiring discussion. My question is about the cost of ensuring the security on the internet. We have seen the new means offering enormous potential and possibilities, but to regulate it, to be following what is going on the internet, to police it has an enormous cost. And the question is, do the operators actually contribute a fair share of the cost of regulating this new technology?
Thank you. So who would like to take the first question?
There are more than 300 civil society organizations that have signed up to the Paris Call. But I think that, we do have sort of a challenge at this moment as we pivot to year 2. We've got a big community. We need to figure out how to communicate on a regular way and find ways to perhaps inspire local chapters. But we very much, I think everyone, we're just one signatory, but I think everybody's committed to having an open multi-stakeholder project.
So, Jean-Baptiste, you want to answer about the coordination of the Paris Call?
Sur la coordination, c'est vrai que jusqu'à maintenant, on est resté très informel, mais on est ouvert à mieux structurer les choses. Je crois que, quelque part, on entre dans une forme de maturité désormais et que, naturellement, il faut être présent à ce rendez-vous de coordination accrue pour une communication et un impact accru. On le voit bien, là, tous les sujets de prise de conscience ont été évoqués à de nombreuses reprises. Et je pense que ça peut aider.
Yeah, so far it's not a process with a secretariat, it's more a call that people have signed on to, but we're still thinking of the way forward. Eugene, do you want to answer about the cost?
Yeah, well, actually, I'm thinking that, well, actually, there are two options to make everyone happy: the states, the private sector, the citizens. But it will take time, long time. And again, what we're speaking, they are hacking. So could be the more optimal to and moving faster. Just this idea came to my mind. So we have a kind of the advising board of the nations which are main contributors to the internet, with technologies, with internet citizens, with what else? So the main contributors to the internet, and they have to agree about the main things and let others to vote for that, to agree or disagree. So to make it's not just that everyone in a room is voting, is discussing, it will take too much time. So this whole time I think about how to do it in a faster way, how to move forward, because I know what the criminals are doing. They're not discussing. They are working. They are hacking. They are taking profit. So, just a little example. So, in the last century, they were the biggest crime, physical crime. There was the train robbery in UK when there was about £7 million was in cash was stolen. 7 million. There was a movie made on that. There was a big story. As far as I remember, £7 million. Now. In the US, the Gonzalez story, $1 billion. $1 billion crime. The Russian-speaking Carbona gang that was in Europe and Russia, €1 billion in 2 years. So it's different now. We have to move.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we have to end this panel. A very quick comment, and then we're
very quick
done.
comment. I think that the cost of insuring needs to be measured to the cost of not insuring. And I feel that, just let me share with you that the estimates of the cost to the global economy for cybercrime stand at almost 450 billion a year. So there's your answer.
It's optimistic.
You get us nervous, Eugene.
I'm afraid it's much more.
I would like to invite you to thank the panel with me, and I would also like to invite you to join us for the following panel of the Global Commission on the Stability of Cyberspace. Thank you so much.